Okay, we can go ahead and get started while we wait for our last panelist to arrive, but I don't want to spend too much time waiting. So hello, everyone. Welcome to this panel during the National Science Policy Network Symposium 2021. My name is Cubby. I'm a third-year PhD student at Northwestern University, and I'm also the Advocacy Committee Chair for NSPN. That's good stuff to know about me for this panel. I am excited here to do this panel on energy democracy, and we have three really great panelists who are super dedicated to their work, all have very different backgrounds and different experiences, so it'll be really, really exciting to hear from them. And I will go ahead and let them introduce themselves. Oh, also a housekeeping thing. You can leave things in the Q&A during the course of the whole thing, and we will spend the second half of the session with audience questions. Or if there's something related, I'll throw it in during the main question session, but feel free to do that whenever something pops into your head. And also feel free to use the chat for any discussion things as well. So let us start with Mariel. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I am Mariel Nanasi. I've been a civil rights lawyer for most of my professional career, but when I learned about climate change and the urgency of it, I decided to switch. And so I was doing a lot of police misconduct and work and suing prisons and such. But then I changed, and now people call me a utility lawyer. And that is because I basically am proud to say that the largest electric monopoly utility in New Mexico, which is called Public Service Company of New Mexico, but they don't serve the public, has a lot of coal and nuclear and gas in its portfolio. And when I learned about the urgency of climate change about 12 or 15 years ago at this point, I thought, oh, well, let's just close the coal and use solar and wind, which we have in abundance. And but I didn't realize that it's all about the money. And so now Public Service Company of New Mexico, which is called PNM, says that me and the organization that I run called New Energy Economy are their chief adversary. I'll leave it at that. Thank you. I'm also a mom and a skier.
Thanks, Mariel. And I'll also include that I lived in Santa Fe for a little bit and it's wonderful. And I'm so glad that this kind of stuff happens there too. Arturo, go ahead.
Well, my name is Arturo Massol-Deyá from Adjuntas, Puerto Rico, up in the mountains, the central part, coffee plantations, beautiful mountains and weather. I am a microbiologist and I work for the University of Puerto Rico, but I'm here because I grew up in this organization, Casa Pueblo, that was founded by my parents, Tinti Deyá and Alexis Massol, and other members of the community. And we have been involved in different environmental struggles to protect the nature, the land from open street mining, from natural gas pipelines and stuff like that. But we are actively engaged in proposing and assuming our own responsibilities, like we're managing 2 state forests, we have a butterfly garden, we have a radio station, a solar cinema, a school inside a forest, and many other educational programs. We have been running with solar power since 1999, and we have upgraded our system throughout the years. And now we are producing much more energy than what we're using. And that is generating wealth for Casa Pueblo and for the community for social reinvestment.
All right, great. Here we go. Here is our third panelist, Marco. Give him a second to settle in. Marco, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. Well, my name is Marco Hernandez. I use he, they pronouns. I am the Public Policy Director for COPAL, a Latino-led organization in Minneapolis. We do a lot when it comes to different issues, but environmental justice is one of them. I first came on the organization as an environmental justice organizer. In addition to that, in the state of Minnesota, I've been appointed by the governor to two different councils, one being the Governor's Advisory Council on Climate Change, and the other being the Minnesota Council on Latino Affairs, in which I'm the chair for the board of directors on the council. So it's really great to be here with y'all today to talk about a lot of the EJ work that I do when it comes to cumulative impacts, when it comes to taking away the concentration of pollution in frontline and BIPOC communities, and then more so about this conversation of democratizing the way that we produce our energy, as well as how community can be a part of that too, especially that we're having this conversation not just on natural gas, but full electrification, what that means and how we need to really democratize that process because the utility companies will definitely swoop in and will centralize a lot of that authority within themselves for profit. So I'll just stop right there and then we can get on with the panel.
Thank you. That was great. Yeah, thank you all for being here. I'm going to start with a basic question of how do you define energy democracy and what does that mean to you? And we can start with Arturo this time.
Well, in our context, Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, and colonialism is something that has prevented Puerto Rico from self-determination. And we have been told that we don't have natural resources, that we cannot self-determine ourselves because of that. But now we know we have plenty of natural resources to power Puerto Rico from within. But it's also, when you think about energy democracy, well, you can be in Minneapolis or Santa Fe or anywhere in the US, and many of the communities are as colonized as Puerto Rico is related to energy. And I guess the best way to describe this is, in political terms, is that there's a dictatorship relationship between who is extracting the resources, who is commanding power generation, and who are the victims. The victims are the planet, is the environment, is the communities, is the people who are basically consumers and at the mercy of those people who are controlling power as the capacity to do work. So when we're talking about energy democracy, it's about changing that balance of power, shifting who's winning, who earns the wealth associated to energy production. And we want people and communities to produce their own energy and be as self-sufficient as possible to enjoy the productive activities of themselves as they can produce their own energy. And that can be done with current technologies. So energy democracy is an action to do something in a more democratic way.
Thanks, that was super great. Marco, you can go next.
I really like what Arturo was saying. Definitely, when I think about energy democracy, it's giving the people a chance to really decide where their electricity comes from, whether that's also produced within their community too. More so, I can even go a step further and say that it's important that we nationalize a lot of these utility companies, because the way how they operate is more so profit instead of just like, oh, like out of the best of my heart, how can the people that we serve receive the best service? And so when thinking of moving towards 100% electrification and discontinue being super dependent on natural gas, just like I was saying before, like there's going to be a huge need to really upgrade the electric grid. And that's going to, a lot of that conversations will just be on the very top level, not a lot of community input into that, as well as how can we see some of that money either go back to overburdened communities? How can we, those types of monies that are used to generate electricity, or if you generate your own, having those utility companies pay you, and how also that money can be used to empower oneself as well. So you can tell I have many ideas of how that looks like, but specifically for me, it's just a chance for people to decide how they want their energy to be produced and how that can look like on a community level.
Yeah, I really like what you said about redistribution of everything, because that's certainly something that is a common theme in environmental justice for both good things and bad things, so that nothing is just concentrated within one community. So thanks for that. Mariel, sorry, go ahead.
The energy companies have more money than in the history of wealth. And both Arturo and Marco reference this, which is that when they not only extract the coal and the oil and the gas and the uranium from the ground, they also extract the wealth from communities. And what they do is they export it to Wall Street, and that goes to the 1%. And what I think we're talking about here, especially, usually I'm not like, oh, technology is the answer, but we have a special opportunity right now, which is that solar, Arturo spoke to this, can be community controlled. And I love that the statement for social reinvestment. And that's exactly right? So instead of literally taking the money and giving it to the people who are the wealthiest already on the planet, so they not only do all this bad stuff, which is causing harm to the climate and the environment, and then obviously frontline communities, but then they're taking the wealth from the poorest people and transferring it to the wealthiest people that already have too much to begin with. And so that is causing a disproportionate other kinds of harm. And what that also does is, and this is, I think, the democracy part, not only can we control our own energy and benefit and reinvest, repurpose that money back into the community, but we can cut them off at screwing up whatever democracy we have left, which is they have so much money, they are buying our politicians. And that's why we haven't gotten to where we want to go. That's why we have a terrible voting system. That's why we have all the bad things that we have, not only in the national level, but the state level and then community levels as well, which is the undermining of democracy, literally. All you have to do is look at who's in power and how they got there. And then even, not all, but a lot of even, people who ran on good policies, they get there and then they're all like silenced, right? They're silenced, they are muted because they can't essentially go after the people who helped put them there, and that's oil and gas, and that's these utilities. And unfortunately, that's why we're seeing stalemates in political action that we want. I'll stop there.
Yeah, you bring up a good point of balancing, getting yourself to a place where you have power to do things without using the support of the very things that you're trying to dismantle, which seems for me very clear cut, like just don't do the latter part of that. But I'm also realistic and can understand how that might end up happening, even if I don't agree with that. You all mentioned redistribution, as I said before. What does that mean to you? What kind of benefits or resources could be redistributed if something like energy democracy, or really democratizing anything in the environmental realm? And anyone can answer this. You don't all have to, but whoever feels compelled.
That's very specific. I mean, that can be done. For example, we have a radio station right there. This is Casa Pueblo, and we have a solar cinema on this side. To run that radio station means like $500 a month on the electrical bill. Out of Puerto Rico, we're losing like $3,000 million a year that for just to pay for the fuels that are needed to power the radio station, and I mean, not the radio station because it's being run with solar power, but to run Puerto Rico. And as energy has the capacity to do work, what we're saying is that people are working, and instead of enjoying their productive activities, they're paying the fuels to someone else. When you have energy generation at the point of consumption and the barber is now producing its own energy, like in Adjuntas, or the bakery or the pharmacy, or many places in Adjuntas, this is being done right now. It means that when the barber is doing his work, he can enjoy much better his productive activity instead of someone extracting his work just for the fuels and the power that is needed to do that job. So that is generating wealth from within that will be used for something else within the community, perhaps. And that's redistributing resources and wealth associated to energy production.
Great. So shifting a little bit to what you all specifically do, what do your organization, or all of you are part of multiple things, what actually do your organizations do to promote energy democracy and to really make it happen in your communities?
Oh, Mariel.
Thank you. So we have a theory of change, which we like to call activist DNA. So one of the strands of the DNA is to stop the violence to Mother Earth, stop the violence and to mostly communities of color, but now also to all of us, because climate change, and as you know, in Santa Fe and New Mexico, we are on the front lines as a state of drought and forest fires. And so some people say that drought is going to hit us hardest than any other place. So this is, and literally we could be out of water, which water is life. And so this is a very big deal. So we have to stop the violence, and the violence is the kind of energy production that we have relied on for so long. And then what is the answer? It's the other strand of DNA, which is expose the vision of what's possible, which Arturo was just explaining, which is how do we transition and who owns that power next? And I think that this question is being asked all over the country, which is very exciting. So one of the things is that we introduced twice so far, haven't gotten there yet, but in our legislature, to have something what we call local choice energy. So to allow us to move away from the utility model that got us into this problem. We can't, go back to them and ask them, oh, could we have like a little bit of solar? When I started fighting them, we had 1% solar, and now we have 4% solar. And if we continue at that snail's pace, we're not going to get to where we need to go. Our only hope is to change the whole system, which has failed us. And so we need to democratize energy, and that is local control. And what's exciting about New Mexico especially, but it can be done elsewhere, is that we have a lot of natural resources, and we should be benefiting our communities, not Wall Street, like I said before. And so we have a bill to do that. And what we really are working on, I will just tell you, is public power. So state-owned public power, and where individual communities and tribal entities can produce or purchase, or both, the energy that their communities need. And then again, the money is repurposed back into other community needs. And so that will help us become more sufficient and also conscious, because see, I think one of the things is that when energy happens there and it's out of sight, then people first of all, they don't know where their electricity comes from when they turn on the light. But second of all, they don't know that the violence is happening to people, and that if they did know this, then perhaps they wouldn't choose to burn coal and, you know, have Native children have to use a pump to breathe, for instance.
I would say mine is also the type of work that we do is also sort of similarly along the lines as like our theory of change is a bit more different, but we do have a climate framework that we did. Basically, so at COPAL, we mostly focus on just like, you know, at the extractive level and how that tends to impact and displace a lot of poor, rural, farm working communities. And we specifically look at Central America, and more specific, Honduras. We did a delegation trip back in 2019, November. We also had, with the help of Alianza Americas, a huge international partner that has offices throughout the Americas. And we also had Attorney General Keith Ellison with us too. So when we were at Honduras, we did see an open mine, which is really huge. And it was situated right next to a very rural, poor community that, you know, they basically live off of their land and farm working. What tends to happen is that there's not a lot of formal processes in place for extractors. They can say that they're investigating land or just exploring the land for different minerals, but that can also mean that they're already extracting. And we have the president of Honduras that has financial stakes in different mining companies that tend to be either from the United States or from Canada. And so a lot of these mines extract precious metals that then goes into either cell phones, computers, solar panels, renewable energy technology. And this isn't only, unique to Central America. We also see this in Africa too. So in the Minnesota legislature, a lot of the times when we have these conversations about solar panels on schools, 100% renewable energy, there also is a conversation about where are these materials coming from? How were they extracted? Were there, either people that were exploited or, sometimes there's child slavery that can happen on that too, in that extractive process. And so we need to also really think about and see, once we're doing that transition, how are we also not contributing to harms and exploitations of people living in underdeveloped countries. And so that's sort of how we focused our climate framework and how those displacements also feeds to forced climate migration and forced economic migration too.
In our case, yes, there's a lot of contradictions and conflicts on everything we do as a society, and we have to be very careful. In the case of Casa Pueblo, we have been protecting land. We're managing state forest, and we have multiple initiatives. What we're doing with the energy component is sort of like a collateral part. After Hurricane Maria in 2017, energy production at the point of consumption became not a privilege, but or an opportunity, became a necessity. We cannot rely on the government for climate adaptation. A lot of people died, and Casa Pueblo at that point was an energy oasis because we were running with solar power. At that point, what we're doing to promote energy independence for the community is what we call the energy insurrection. This is something, we don't have a national protocol or agenda top down to promote energy freedom for Puerto Rico. So it has to be built from the bottom up. And there's a conflict going on. And after 2017, what I can tell you is that beside Casa Pueblo and Radio Casa Pueblo being operated with solar power, the transmission tower is also energy independent. We have a solar cinema. We have done grocery stores for food security in rural areas, which is the first line of food access to food for food security. In an island that 85% of the food is imported. So we have to rely on, for now, in that sort of network. We have done critical infrastructure like the fire station, the emergency unit, the elderly home, the elementary school are running fully on solar power. What we have done is businesses for economic activation, the barbershop, the hardware store, La Lechonera, El Chinchorro, multiple businesses are now running with solar power. We have done like 150 homes are running like Casa Pueblo, low-income families for health reasons, or to deal with or to confront poverty, or for the right of access to energy. So not only for people who can afford to invest in this infrastructure, we are not a public, neither a private initiative, we are a social initiative. And we're now building a solar forest sculptures that are gonna be a functional microgrid setup. So the arts, the culture is merged with science and technology for community development. We are about to complete downtown Adjuntas is going to be running on a microgrid. All the solar installation have been done, and these businesses are going to pay the energy. This is being done with the Honnold Foundation, with Alex Honnold, the guy who climbed rocks without ropes from Free Solo. And the idea is to power downtown Adjuntas, to provide the means for energy production to the local business owners, the place that has the highest energy demand and create most of the jobs in town. But the businesses got organized and they're gonna pay themselves for the electricity. That money will be managed within the co-op, the local co-op. That money will be used for emergency fund, for operational cost, but most of the resources will be to create wealth associated to electricity production, to build more homes of low-income families, also reach energy security. So the electricity component is envisioned in this energy insurrection as a way to promote local development horizontally across different political beliefs, regardless of religions, and thinking in the well-being of the local community.
Wow, all of your answers were really great, and I have like 5 million other questions I could ask. But I do want to mention, audience, please feel free to put stuff in the Q&A. Like I said, I have many questions I can ask, but I want to make sure we're talking about what everyone wants to hear. So Arturo, you mentioned how incorporating art and culture in these sort of initiatives is really important. And I think about that a lot, of how when there are social initiatives like this, it's not, you can't just depend on the technology. You have to actually think about the culture of people. So this is like a two-part question. How much does your location and your personal identity, but the identity of the communities you work with, how does that affect how you approach things? And extension of that is, how do you see that affecting the viability and the possibility of success of energy democratization in the United States as a whole? Because we all know the United States, capitalist, individualistic, this sort of thing is definitely difficult to implement. So thoughts on all of that?
Well, we have, as a U.S. territory, yet we have our own language, our own territory, and our own culture, very rich. So it's a mean for resistance. It gives us identity and collective self-esteem. Actually, when we got organized in 1980, was to confront an open street mining proposal. And we went around every single area, nearby communities, and we have our first protest, and only one person show up. One person. We have a photograph in our living room in Casa Pueblo that you can see, only one person, and many speakers on top of the stage. At that point, we realized that knowledge itself, it doesn't change anything. We get educated, we can know a lot about global warming and all the consequences and the reasons and the contradictions, but just by knowing it doesn't translate into a change. And at that point, how we turn from being from a really minority to become a majority and stop mining, and we're no longer a minority with energy independence either. I think we are a majority already, is because we embrace what we call our social equation for transformation. Social equation for transformation. So it's science, culture, and community for social transformation. Everything we do, we think in all three elements in order to promote a transformation. If we're not promoting transformation, that means that we are basically sustaining what is right now, and we are not aiming for that. We're fighting as volunteer effort to transform this reality. And for us, it has worked to link all three: for resistance, for education, for engagement, for building an alternative present and a different future.
Yeah, I'll give you one example about how we do that, not as fully, I think, as Arturo, but we have this program called Soul for All. And what we've done is we have raised money to solarize different buildings, but we always partner with communities. And so our first one was on the Crown Point Chapter House. And the chapter houses are, people might know that we have Navajo Nation. It's enormous. It spans both states of Arizona and New Mexico. And there are 120 chapter houses, which are like community hubs. And I'll just be honest, years ago now, I think it was 2011, I went out where the extractive economy is live and well. There's a lot of coal burning on Navajo Nation. And so we went out there to look at it. And this Navajo nurse said to me, you know, you people from Santa Fe, you come here and you say that we shouldn't burn coal, but we don't have any solar here. And, you know, wouldn't it be great if we just had solar on our chapter house, which is like their central hub? And I said, I'm going to go back to Santa Fe and raise the money so that we can solarize that chapter house. And we did. And a year later, it had solar panels on it, and we make an agreement. And the agreement with the community partner is, and now we've done 15 of these, is we'll raise the money, but you have to do some kind of appropriate cultural party, so that you invite your community to the solarization party, and we have a celebration, and it's got to be appropriate food and whatever kind of music or dance or whatever you want. And so we've done this many times now, and we've had country bands, and we've had native drumming. So like the whole spectrum. And what's so beautiful, especially in this crazy world that we live in, which, you know, people are really down and despairing. And I like to say activism is the antidote to despair. And so we have these celebrations, and we were having them 1 or 2 or 3 a year up until COVID, which we took a break. And then we just celebrated our last one literally 2 weeks ago. And there, you know, 100 people showed up, and we had a Lone Piñones band play, and there's solar panels, and people were so grateful to be celebrating something good in the community. And we had a delicious lunch, and it was just, yeah, it's important to celebrate victories and to celebrate them in a community inspired and really close way. I mean, people left the good kind of high after that, you know, just full of goodness.
Marco, do you want to add anything? You don't have to. But...
No, everybody added very good points.
Great. Ooh, we have a question in the Q&A. What kind of resistance to energy democratization have each of you faced, either from outside or within the community, and how did you deal with those difficulties? Great question.
I can go first. So part of our work is also trying to do like a just transition process in Minneapolis, whether that means when it comes to the energy consumption of especially the buildings in downtown, how can that money be redistributed in order to have like a just transition process and funding to do that? But in order to do that type of tax, that is preempted by the state, which was also lobbied for by Xcel Energy and Centerpoint Energy back in the 80s, so that it can be really difficult to add either fees, taxes to do these types of just transitions. But with preemption, that means that the city can't do it on a local level, nor can it just be changed by the utility companies. You would have to literally write legislation in the state legislature and hope that passes with a majority. And looking at the state of Minnesota being the only state with a split legislature, the House controlled by Democrats, the Senate controlled by Republicans, and having a Democratic governor, that's never going to pass with the Senate like that. So those are definitely a lot of the roadblocks that are added on purpose. And to answer your question, like how did we overcome that? Not yet. And so we still have to figure out ways in which we can do it either with just a utility, if it's like a minor change to sort of get us closer to the goal that we want to. But we really need to reassess because, yeah, at this point, it'll be hard to pass state legislation with preemption.
I think there's always been, we're fighting the powerful, we're fighting the man, in every way they control. So you have to be, you have to be nimble, and you have to be agile, and you have to be strategic, and you have to say you're not going to pursue the things like Marco was just explaining in his specific circumstance around legislation. So what do you have to do? I mean, that's one of the reasons why we've done these different individual buildings, because we're hoping to really inspire people so that to say this other way hasn't worked. And so we have to, unfortunately, organizing, I think, is the toughest job there is. And what that means is it means building power, building an alternative. I'll give you one positive example of like, because we think firefighters are on the front lines, and they're also often handsome, and people love firefighters. They don't like love police, but they do love firefighters because they save lives. And so we went up and we said to the county, Santa Fe County, hey, look, we'll solarize. We want to solarize one of your fire stations, and we'll raise half the money. You find money in your budget, and then we will solarize the fire station. And we got some like looks, from the firemen which they were all men, who were like, really? We're going to have solar? Is it going to really work? Well, of course, we raised the money. We put the solar panels on. And as Arturo says, it worked. And not only did it work, but at that time, this is not now, but at that time, so it was like 10 years ago at this point, they got a check from P&M, the local electric monopoly utility, for $11. $11. And when the Santa Fe County received that check, because the solar had, quote, overproduced, and it went back onto the grid more than what they were consuming, Santa Fe County changed its policy and now has solarized at least 6 or 7 other fire stations, and they are committed to solarizing all fire stations in Santa Fe County. And that's a beautiful example of like, okay, you think, oh, one little building got solarized, but it ended up being turned into a policy because beforehand, the firefighters were skeptical. And then not only did they get that $11, but they were like, oh, we had a budget of whatever it was, a couple $1,000s a year to put into electricity. And what did they say? They said, oh, now we're going to take that money that they had to pay electricity, right? But now they don't have to pay it because they've got solar, it's self-sufficiency. And they take that money and they're putting it into fire safety equipment. Like, it couldn't have been a better story. And the Republican governor of New Mexico, it was the only time she voted for money and signed a bill for money for firefighters, which was to solarize their fire stations. So that was a good success. You know, what is she going to do? What is the Republican governor going to do? She's going to say no to firefighters. So it was like a good way to, I mean, this is a good example of like, how do you build and how do you negotiate? How do you work around, you know, the issues, because they are the ones with all the money and the power and the politicians, but we figured out a way to put her in a corner and do what's right. So that's a good little story.
We're kind of busy here with kind of political discussions are taking place in Puerto Rico, but I think that if you see in the US, the Biden administration, which is sort of what we see in Puerto Rico, I don't know if greenwashing is the right term, but they were using, oh, we're going green, we're gonna do all of this, and yet what you see in actions are completely the opposite direction. The same thing is happening in Puerto Rico. It's like they're creating these general understanding. Don't worry, we're gonna take care. We're gonna move Puerto Rico to clean energy sources. We're going to take care of that. And yet all the main investments are for natural gas pipeline to gasify Puerto Rico, and then just a tiny fraction for example, for solar energy. I mean, that contradiction, that greenwashing or whatever is called, is treason to the future of our country and our planet. Of course, there's political conflicts, political repression to people who are confronting, you know, the burning of coal in different power plants. And with the privatization of the public utility recently, just a few months, it's like a way to try to perpetuate the same centralized power generation control by a few. A clear conflict with the future that we want, that is to promote people to produce their own energy. There's a conflict in the business model and the aspiration of Puerto Rico to produce their own energy and for people to embrace in means for climate adaptation, for example.
I think that's, if I could just piggyback for a second, I think that it's really, really important. We are seeing that on an international scale, a national scale, and then in our own state. And this, like, especially around hydrogen, I don't know if you all are hip to what's going on about that, but it's really, really scary. And this whole net zero thing, which is like, oh, we've got net zero. Well, in the meantime, we're going to burn, you know, 3 times as much carbon. And then in the last year, supposedly, then they'll have some other kind of cockamamie idea. The thing is that it's all of this over and over and over again. And it's exactly what Arturo said, which is the concentration of the wealth in the few. And that's the same paradigm. Like, oh, and you know, it's very disappointing to, I mean, I didn't really think that it was going to be much more than this about Biden, but you know, he's pushing hydrogen and they're supporting all these pipelines and transmission lines and all this other stuff that I just think that that's where the real conflict is. That's where the real rub is, which is like, we're talking about, I mean, hats off to you. Like, I can't believe how I'm like, I want to go visit Puerto Rico and go see Casa Pueblo myself. I'm blown away. that is what we need. That's what we need. We need Casa Pueblos all over the country, you know, and to start exposing the vision of what's possible. And I think one of the problems that we're seeing in life is a crisis of imagination, because people are so down, people are so depressed, and these companies and the powerful, you know, leaders, well, they're not leading, but officials, you know, keep coming up with these greenwashing techniques, and they're really scary and they have to be resisted. And it's hard because who doesn't want net zero? It sounds good, right? But it's not zero. Somebody said, oh, we should have real zero, which is keep it in the ground. And I heard this just yesterday, this beautiful Native young woman talk about, look, instead of focusing all on death, which is oil, gas, uranium, etc., from the ground, right? Why don't we be about life, which is affirming, and solar and wind and people, and create community. I mean, it's just that's what it all has. It comes back to that. It's, you got to create democracy. That's the hard work to be done.
Great, thank you. And on that note, we're pretty much out of time, but I want to ask our three panelists very last question. If there's anything, any like book or some sort of media you would point people towards to learn more about energy democracy, or anything else you talked about.
I share a few links in the chat on what we're doing. There's a paper that we wrote on our energy for our country. And in addition, I added a link that if you want to support Casa Pueblo, we are economically self-sufficient because we're producing Café Madre Isla coffee. Is what gives us enough resources for us to be our own voice. We're not getting money from the government, from anyone, so we can say whatever we think is the best. We're not compromised by donors. But if you want to support Casa Pueblo, you can buy coffee online, and that you will get the best coffee, and you can enjoy that in Minneapolis if you want, while you will be in a solidarity with the energy insurrection that is happening in Adjuntas. So I want to thank you for the opportunity for sharing this honor with this panel. It has been great.
Yes, thank you. You all might want to look at the only pueblo in New Mexico. We have 19 pueblos in New Mexico, and the only pueblo, it's the smallest pueblo, it's called Picaris, is 100% renewable. And there's a little video, it's like 9 minutes, that I put in the chat. And it's about energy democracy, and then also the law that we tried to get passed. The other thing is that if people are looking for a book, this is sort of like a little Bible. It's called Energy Democracy, Advancing Equity in Clean Energy Solutions. And it's by Denise Fairchild and Al Weinreb, and I'll put it in the chat. And people are free to go to New Energy Economy, also to support us, but also see what we are doing and fighting and winning, and get on our e-blast. And thank you so much to this panel, and a pleasure to be with you.
Great. I'll also be quick because I know we're definitely out of time, but again, it's also an honor to be on this panel with you all. You can check out our work at copalmn.org, where we do environmental justice, but also a variety of different issues affecting the Latino community. I do remember sending 2 documents to somebody that's part of your reading. So one of them being on the Hernandez principles for democratic organizing, especially if you want to do organizing on this issue, and also the principles of environmental justice as well. So definitely take a look at that. Great.
So thank you everyone for joining. And of course, thank you the most to our panelists. I think this was a really great discussion. And like I said, there's a million other questions we could all talk about. Real quick, in the chat, I put a survey.